Welcome to Trench Diaries. Iron Coffins. Part 15.
The commander, a sturdy and stocky officer with blonde hair, had the look of an old sailor about him. I followed him into the small officers' mess and was introduced to the chief engineer and the second watch officer. We exchanged a few pleasantries, and then I was briefed on the boat's history. U-612 had been commissioned in Hamburg the previous March. Since then, it had been continuously engaged in frontline training in the Baltic Sea. Oberleutnant Siegmann hoped to complete the required exercises within 3 months. Then the crew would be prepared for the Battle of the Atlantic. I learned that the former first watch officer had been reassigned due to illness, that the dark-haired chief engineer, Lieutenant Helmut Friedrich, was married and about a year older than me. I also learned that the second watch officer, Lieutenant Heinz Riedel, was a fellow crewmate, which surprised me. Neither of them had frontline experience, which likely influenced my assignment. Siegmann, on the other hand, as he explained, had participated in an Atlantic mission as a commander trainee. 1/3 of the crew had served on frontline boats, while the rest were being trained for their first combat patrol. I introduced myself to the chief petty officer, who made an excellent impression and could boast of many years of service. Afterwards, I withdrew with the commander into his cramped niche, where he briefly and succinctly informed me of his expectations. As the first watch officer of U-612, I was in charge of torpedoes and artillery. My duty was to fire during nocturnal surface attacks and supervise fire control during submerged assaults. As the deputy commander, I was responsible for the well-being of the men, create duty schedules, oversee their executions, and drive the crew's training forward with all means available. I had been selected solely based on my combat patrols for the position of first watch officer. Afterwards, Heinz Riedel and I had a very frank conversation in the tiny mess. We agreed to respect each other's positions and to focus on the common enemy rather than fight amongst ourselves. This brief chat evolved into a close friendship, which only ended with his death a few months later. U-612 set sail on the same day. We crossed the Bay of Danzig and in the late afternoon moored at the pier of the front training group on the Hela Peninsula. I housed our men in clean barracks nestled idyllically among the stunted pine trees in the dunes, and U-612 continued its training with a 6-week torpedo firing exercise. Every day we set out to sea at 7 a.m, and an hour later we were already firing practice torpedoes at the awaiting target ships. We adjusted our routine in the afternoon. This time it was the commander himself who fired one torpedo after another during his underwater mock attacks. After expending all the torpedoes, we hurried back into the small harbor at Hela and took on a new load of torpedoes. We repeated this program in the darkness, usually firing the last torpedo around midnight. The men worked tirelessly 6 days a week like this for 6 long weeks. In early July, the crew completed their most strenuous exercise, and U-612 was assigned to another training division, and a more relaxed schedule replaced the feverish activity. We moved the boat to a pier in Rotenhaven, where I moved into the stone-cold quarters of the former naval command. We still went to sea daily, but had enough leisure time to redirect our recreational interests. The famous seaside resort of Sopot was only a 20-minute train ride away. I spent weekends at its luxurious casino, on the beach, or in cafes, hosting or attending small parties with comrades and their girlfriends. While the boat and crew prepared for the Battle of the Atlantic, our armies pushed deeper into Russia. Leningrad was besieged but held tenaciously. Sevastopol on the Crimean Peninsula had surrendered. Our divisions had reached the Caucasus, captured Rostov-on-Don, and advanced toward the rich oil fields of Maikop. In North Africa, Rommel had led his Africa Corps from victory to victory, capturing El Alamein in the Libyan desert and advancing toward the Nile. In the Atlantic, our boats attacked the Allied convoy routes with increasing ferocity and achieved massive successes. Our operations had extended to the east coast of the United States, where the boats encountered little or no resistance. From Nantucket to Cape Hatteras, from Florida to the Windward Islands, our torpedoes shattered the tranquility of previously undisturbed shipping. Between Boston and New York, off Jacksonville, Miami, Havana, New Orleans and Corpus Christi, near Barranquilla, Maracaibo and Port of Spain, Barbados and Guadeloupe, our submarines assaulted Allied shipping routes, torpedoed, shelled and sank a large number of ships. During the first 6 months of the war with the USA, 2.5 million tons, over 500 ships, including 140 tankers, were sent to the ocean floor. The golden age of submarine warfare had arrived. The training level of our men reached new heights. However, I myself was in a state of constant irritation due to our time-consuming exercises. I longed to be on the front lines, sinking ships and celebrating victory. But my patience was once again put to the test. August the 6th nearly put an end to my ambitions. Like on any other day, U-612 left Rotenhaven at 8 o'clock. The Danzig Bay was shallow and the sun reflected its rays like a mirror. The day promised to be very hot again. Over 20 U-boats headed to their assigned exercise areas, their wakes splashing silver in the clear morning air. Danzig lay on the starboard side, stretching its old churches and city towers into the spotless blue sky. Our chief helmsman, Prager, constantly took bearings of the land, and after nearly 2 hours at a moderate pace and casual conversation, Prager reported that the boat had arrived at the assigned square. The commander was informed, and shortly thereafter his white cap appeared in the tower hatch. We began our daily exercises. The sailors, divided into 3 watches, alternated between the 8.8 cm deck gun and the 2 cm anti-aircraft gun, simulated diving maneuvers and conducted several mock attacks. At 11 o'clock we submerged. U-612 traveled at a depth of 30 meters, around 100 feet, and made 3 knots. I sat with part of the crew and 12 additional submarine cadets in the forward compartment and taught the basics of torpedo and artillery. Then, at 11:42, the boat received a sharp and heavy blow from astern. The force raised the stern first upwards and then to starboard. We had been rammed underwater. I immediately called out, "Prepare the escape lung, all hands to the control room." Then I ran aft through the central aisle until I was stopped in the engine room by a stream of water as thick as an arm. U-612 immediately became stern heavy and sank. I saw some men in the rear torpedo room and shouted, "All hands forward, or you won't make it out alive." They hesitated for a moment and then jumped through the waterfall. The boat filled rapidly. I managed to get the people out of the rear compartments, closed the watertight bulkheads, jumped into the control room and closed the aft pressure hull door behind me. In the meantime, Siegmann had managed to blow all the ballast and bring the boat to the surface. Friedrich had let the compressed air hiss through all the pipes and put the forward dive planes hard up and the rear dive planes hard down to keep the boat on the surface as long as possible until everyone had escaped. The electric motors were still racing at full speed. The commander on the bridge steered his wounded boat towards the coast, 4 endless miles to the south. I ordered all available escape lungs to be distributed to our submarine cadets and drove the men up the aluminum ladder. For a second, I glimpsed the blue sky through the round opening of the tower hatch. I felt an irresistible urge to climb the ladder, but duty damned me to endure on the narrow tube and possibly drown along with the chief engineer. I had one eye on the swinging depth gauge needle and the other on the men leaving the sinking ship. Soon, the stern of the boat would be too heavy. It would sink like a stone and pull us down with it to the bottom of the sea. I spun around and shouted into the tower, "Shake the lead out of your feet, men, the others want to get out of the tube too." U-612 suddenly fell away at the stern. A shout from the bridge, "Boat is sinking, damn it, get out of there!" The last 2 stokers climbed the ladder. Friedrich jumped over the valve station, bent under the tower's extension and rushed upwards. I followed. A sudden, heavy rush of water almost tore me from the ladder. I pushed against a ton of water, forced myself through the round opening, and was pulled onto the bridge by the commander. Then the sea washed me away. At that moment, U-612 extended its sharp bow from the waterline, then the entire bow, like the hand of a drowning man, almost perpendicular, and sank. I was shaken by the suddenness of its destruction. The crew drifted in a gently rippling sea. I noticed with a shivering shock that I had neither a rescue lung nor a life vest on. I had given both to the cadets. However, the water was warm and only a light breeze ruffled on the surface. In the distance, I saw the commander's white cap gleaming in the sun. It still sat neatly on his head, which floated within the yellow life vest. Siegmann's voice echoed over the water. "Stay together, boys. We'll be picked up soon." Then he swam a semicircle and turned to me. "Did you get all the men out of the boat?" "Not a soul left on board, sir. I was the last to leave." Black dots in yellow life vests and red rescue lungs bobbed up and down in the gentle swell. In the hazy south, I vaguely made out the coast. The current carried us further out into the bay, and familiar with its strength, I knew it was impossible to swim to the coast. We drifted for about 20 minutes. Then, the bow of a boat cut through the surface nearby. Within seconds, the boat surfaced and gained speed towards the black, red, and yellow dots. The boat that had dealt the deadly blow was about to make a second mistake. I stretched far out of the water and waved both arms. It was a desperate attempt to signal the boat to stop its engines. Someone luckily understood my signals. The boat's diesel engines were shut down and it glided slowly towards us. Suddenly a second boat appeared and maneuvered cautiously closer. Our men swam towards the two steel islands and were pulled on board, coughing, spluttering, sneezing, and dripping wet. Helping hands draped blankets around their shoulders, and I climbed onto the boat that had sent ours to the bottom. Siegmann accepted the commander's apology with visible discomfort. His annoyance grew when the culprit explained that he hadn't noticed he had rammed a foreign object underwater. Our men assembled on the aft deck for muster. I counted 37 heads, including some of our cadets who had performed excellently. I calculated that there must be 22 people on Friedrich's boat, so I took the Morse lamp and signaled, "Please report the number of rescued individuals." His answer came promptly. "I have 20 men on board." "Is that number including yourself?" "Yes," he blinked back. "Please count again. Together you should be 22 men." "I'm sorry, I can't make 20 men into 22, the chief engineer blinked. 2 men were missing. I myself was sure that I had not left anyone on board U-612. Siegmann, shaken by the result of the count, said angrily, "That's just what we needed, XO. 2 men missing. Didn't you report to me that you were the last to leave the boat?" Yes, I did. I did my best to get all the men out of the boat. There's no one left on board," I replied, pointing helplessly to where our boat had sunk. Our search for the 2 individuals proved fruitless, as we found only 2 floating life vests. We returned to Rotenhafen on the very boat that had put us in this miserable situation. The boat's position had been wrong at the moment of the collision. Its commander had miscalculated or completely disregarded the strong current caused by the Vistula River's outflow. He'd been sailing at a depth of 30 meters, 100 feet, without using the sonar or periscope. Negligence and error had cost the lives of 2 men and destroyed a submarine. The devastating consequences of U-612 sinking became apparent the next morning when Siegmann conducted the daily muster. Instead of being on board our boat, we were assembled in the courtyard of the accommodations. It was a very sobering awakening. There we stood, a highly qualified crew, but without a boat. After roll call, the commander invited us officers to his office to discuss our future. The mood had hit rock bottom. We knew that as a fully trained crew, we would undoubtedly receive a new boat. However, the lengthy process of boat familiarization, sea trials, shooting exercises and general training until the boat was ready for combat would set us back by many months. In the meantime, the juiciest convoys would have been intercepted and sunk by other boats, and we would have to make do with the meager leftovers. There had to be another, faster solution. And so, we explored the possibility of raising U-612 from a depth of 48 meters, or about 150 feet. The idea of salvaging our boat quickly took shape, and Siegmann presented his plan in all its details to U-Boat Command. 2 days later, we received the answer. Salvage U-612. Without further delay, we got to work. I found a diving company with the necessary experience. Friedrich hired 2 enormous floating cranes, and a tugboat with a diver, Friedrich and myself on board, left the port of Danzig the following morning. The weather was excellent and favorable for our endeavor. The 2 cranes arrived over the grave of U-612 on the same day. Anchoring took up most of the next day, and while Friedrich and I focused on salvage operations, Siegmann and Riedel relocated the crew to Danzig, where we were accommodated on an aging ocean liner of the Hamburg America line. It is after action report time, so this was unexpected. For the second time, Herbert almost died during a training exercise. As my best friend always says, big machines make big accidents, and this is no exception. So what happened here? Well, the other boat was U-444 under Oberleutnant zur See Albert Langfeld. I will put his picture up on the screen. Unfortunately, there's very little information about the incident. In U-444's war diary, all we find is a single line of text which says, "Collision with U-612 on August 6, 1942. I did not find anything about Langfeld being punished or reprimanded, so there's that. U-444 would later go on 2 war patrols and was sunk herself on March 11th, 1943, with the loss of 41 men. There were only 4 survivors. We have a survivor account of the sinking, which I will now read to you. And I quote, "On March 11th, 1943, in the middle of the North Atlantic, while attacking the convoy HX-228, U-444 was surprised by the British destroyer Harvester. It dived in response to the diving alarm, was heavily damaged by depth charges, forced to resurface, and then rammed by Harvester. U-444 and the destroyer were stuck together for about 10 minutes. The crew of U-444 abandoned ship, and in the orders of the commander and the chief engineer, the hull penetration vents were opened to sink the submarine. However, in the meantime, the Free French corvette Acogny arrived at the scene and rammed the already sinking U-boat once more. Then the corvette conducted a depth charge attack on the sinking U-444. The crew, swimming in a group near the boat, lost their lives in the process. Only 1 man was rescued by Harvester and 4 others were saved by Acogny, although one of the rescued sailors succumbed to his injuries on board the corvette." End quote. So as you can see, depth charges not only pose a threat against submarines, you wouldn't want to be caught swimming in the vicinity of one going off. As you can imagine, it's quite tragic surviving not 1 but 2 ramming attempts by enemy warships, only to be blown to pieces by depth charges in the events following. So, that's it for this episode. Next time we will find out if the salvage of U-612 is successful or not. And if you like this episode, like, comment, subscribe, you know what to do, and I appreciate your continued support. Cheers.